Recently, I listened to and then read an Interpreter article by George Mitten entitled "The Crucifixion as a Mockery, Witness, and Warning of the Judgment." It is an excellent article, and I encourage any who find this video and its perspectives interesting to read his article for the fuller account given there. He brings out how the scene leading up to and including the crucifixion is a parody of Jesus' final judgment of the world. He also brings out that our judgment of Christ is an essential component of the judgment he brings to us. To set the context, it is important to realize that kingship in ancient Israel and in the ancient world generally included an assumed right of judgment. The king has power to hand out sentences of life or death. To show some of what this includes, or what the set of symbolism includes, I will start in Matthew 27 and then continue in Luke 23. In Matthew 27, beginning at verse 28, we read, referring to the soldiers, "And they stripped him and put on him a scarlet robe." Isaiah 63, 1-3, similarly recalls the scene when the Lord is coming for judgment, and those beholding him ask, "Who is this that cometh from Edom, with dyed garments from Bozrah? This that is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength?" Then the Lord replies, "I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save." And they ask again, "Wherefore art thou red in thine apparel, and thine garments like him that treadeth in the wine fat?" And he answers, explaining that he's trodden the winepress alone. So this clothing they're putting on him is characteristic, which is also red, is characteristic of what the Lord wears in his second coming. But today is not that part of the judgment, but rather the part where he will be judged by our response to the persecuted, humiliated Lord. Continuing at verse 28. "And when they had plaited a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head, and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him, and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews." I note that Romans 14:10-11 specifically associates bowing the knee and judgment. Beginning at verse 10, "But why dost thou judge thy brother? Or why dost thou set it not thy brother? For we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. For it is written, As I live, saith the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God." Continuing with Matthew 27 at verse 30. "And they spit upon him, and took the reed, and smote him on the head. And after they had mocked him, they took the robe off from him, and put his own raiment on him, and led him away to crucify him." So they were dressing him up to judge, even though ironically he is on his way to judgment. Either way, I suppose, he is on his way to judgment of some sort. When he is crucified, the judgment scene effectively continues. Luke 23:32-33 records that, "And there were also two other malefactors led with him to be put to death. And when they were come to the place which is called Calvary, there they crucified him and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left." Quoting Mitten's article, "In Matthew's Gospel, the Lord first gives the parable of the sheep and the goats with its judgment setting, where the Son of Man sits on his throne in the judgment of the nations as the king, and separates them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left." So the situation of the thieves on his right and on his left should call to mind for us Jesus' earlier teachings about the judgment. From Mitten again, "The thieves represent persons of differing response to the outstretched Christ. One thief railed against the Lord's authority in words reminiscent of Lucifer in the temptation. If thou be Christ, save thyself and us." The penitent thief, presumably on the Lord's right hand, acknowledges both the innocence of Jesus and his own transgressions, while recognizing Christ's kingship and thus the right to preside at the judgment. "Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom." Jesus is lifted up in crucifixion, but the consequence of that is that we are lifted up before him in judgment, based in part on the eternally weighty question, "What think ye of Christ?" which is put to all of us as we see him lifted up in his deepest humiliation.